There are places in this country that feel larger than themselves. Places where history doesn't just sit quietly behind glass. It walks beside you. The National Mall in Washington, D.C. is one of those places. When most people picture it, they imagined polished marble, waving flags, and postcard-perfect monuments standing beneath blue skies. America's front yard, a place of pride, a place of memory. But standing there in person with my son beside me, it didn't feel polished at all. It felt human. Messy, heavy, reverent, exhausting. Beautiful in some places, worn down in others. A landscape carrying far more than tourists and photographs. And honestly, that made it feel even more real. Originally, we had planned to spend the day doing museums first and monuments later. That was the plan anyway. But somewhere between downtown traffic and our GPS having what can only be described as a complete existential crisis, we kept getting turned around. At some point, after enough missed turns and confused rerouting, we accidentally stumbled onto parking near the monuments instead. And sometimes the road chooses for you. So we parked the car, looked at each other, and decided, all right then, today belongs to the National Mall. What followed was roughly a 3-mile walk through some of the most emotionally heavy ground in America. We saw the Lincoln Memorial, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the Vietnam Women's Memorial, the World War II Memorial, the Reflecting Pool, of course, the Washington Monument, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, the D.C. War Memorial. And somewhere in the middle of all that walking, all that history, and all those monuments, something quietly shifted. Not just in me, in my son too. As we moved through the war memorials near the National Mall, he carried himself differently. More patriotic. More formal. He stood tall beside statues of soldiers. He saluted. He paused quietly at names etched into stone as if he instinctively understood they deserved silence. Children don't fake reverence very well. That's one of the things I remember most vividly about that day. Watching my then 10-year-old son instinctively feel the weight of those places without anyone telling him to. No performance, no pretending, just genuine respect. And as a parent, there was something profoundly moving about standing there watching history reach across generations in real time. Because the National Mall isn't just a collection of monuments. It's a conversation between generations, between ideals and failures, between sacrifice and memory, between the America we celebrate and the America we still struggle to fully reckon with. Because beneath all the marble and granite are stories most visitors never hear. What people often don't realize is that the National Mall wasn't always this pristine ceremonial landscape. For much of the 1800s, this area was chaotic. Instead of open green lawns, there were railroad tracks cutting through the city, markets, grazing livestock, industrial zones, muddy paths, construction debris. The elegant vision Pierre L'Enfant imagined for Washington, D.C. was ignored for decades. At one point, a canal even ran through this area near what is now Constitution Avenue. The Washington City Canal was supposed to become a thriving commercial route connecting the Potomac River to the city. Instead, it failed spectacularly. It became polluted, stagnant, and foul-smelling before eventually being filled in entirely. Today, people drive over the ghost of that canal every single day without realizing it's there beneath the pavement. And then there are stories far darker than failed engineering projects. Because this landscape that now symbolizes freedom and democracy was once directly tied to slavery. Slave markets and holding pens once operated disturbingly close to the capital itself. Enslaved people were marched across areas near the mall in chains while politicians debated liberty inside government buildings nearby. That contradiction is part of this place too, a painful one. And it deserves to be remembered alongside the monuments. Because history becomes dangerous when we only preserve the polished parts. That thought stayed with me while we walked. Especially because not every part of the National Mall looked beautiful when we visited. Constitution Gardens, honestly, looked rough. The pond had algae and debris floating across the water. Sidewalks were torn apart for repairs. Duck poop covered parts of the pathways. At one point, we stopped to watch ducks diving underwater near the shoreline. One kept flipping completely upside down to feed, so all we could see were its feet and tail sticking straight up out of the water. And then, the duck pooped mid-dive. My son's reaction was immediate disgust, mixed with hysterical laughter, which honestly felt important too somehow. Because even in these massive historic places, life keeps happening. People laugh. Kids make faces at ducks. Tourists get blisters. Parents need breaks. History isn't sealed away in glass cases. It exists alongside ordinary moments. We eventually sat down to rest near the water, and I remember asking a park ranger why parts of the park looked so rundown. She explained that they were beginning restoration work to improve the area again. And strangely enough, I appreciated hearing that. Because preservation is work. It's constant work. Even our most sacred places need care, maintenance, and people willing to fight to preserve them. As we continued walking, helicopters periodically thundered overhead, low enough that we could actually see the crews inside. Military helicopters, possibly Coast Guard. One may have been medical. They were so low they rattled the atmosphere around us, briefly pulling everyone's attention skyward before fading back into the city noise. It was surreal. A reminder that Washington isn't just symbolic power. It's active power, living power. Moving overhead while tourists quietly read memorial plaques below. By the time we accidentally found our car again, we were exhausted enough to officially surrender for the day. And honestly, we still missed the Korean War Memorial completely. Not intentionally. We were simply done. Our feet hurt, our brains were overloaded, history fatigue had fully set in, so we returned to the hotel and collapsed for the evening. Later that night, I turned on the news for the first time during the trip and immediately saw a story about a man who had reportedly been heading toward the White House with weapons and ammunition inside his vehicle. Apparently he got lost, stopped to ask a police officer for directions, and was immediately arrested. My son and I just stared at each other afterward, and both quietly agreed we were very glad we'd already visited the White House the day before. Washington, D.C. has a strange emotional rhythm like that. One moment you're standing in awe beside monuments built to preserve national memory. The next moment, reality crashes back in through a television screen. That night, we walked over to McDonald's for dinner and watched a toddler repeatedly attempt to escape out the restaurant doors into busy city traffic while his exhausted parents struggled to keep up. My son shook his head and muttered that they needed parenting classes. Thankfully, the tiny escape artist never made it outside, and somehow that ordinary little moment became part of the memory too. Because travel isn't made entirely of cinematic moments. It's exhaustion, street noise, sore feet, wrong turns, unexpected laughter, duck poop, heavy history, and moments when your child suddenly begins understanding the weight of the world around them. That's what I remember most about the National Mall. Not just the monuments themselves, but the feeling of walking through a place where America remembers itself, both the beautiful parts and the painful ones. If you've ever visited the National Mall or had a place unexpectedly reach you emotionally, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you enjoy journeys through history, hidden stories, and the deeply human moments found along the road, make sure to subscribe and travel with us again. Because sometimes the places that teach us the most are the ones still whispering long after we leave.